Hello, welcome to Normal Islands Live. I'm Curtis Daly and I'm joined by the amazing Louisa Munch. Louisa, how are you dealing with this disgusting cold weather?
I'm not. Well, to be fair, I am a northerner, so we're quite used to the cold weather up there. But yeah, it's not my thing, if I'm honest.
Hmm. I'm a southerner living in the north, and that's why I'm probably struggling. I ain't got the stones. But I'm very happy to have you on with your expertise once again. I'm really excited. It's going to be a fantastic show.
Mhm.
This is what we've got coming up for you. Zach Polanski explains the economic agenda on Laura Koonsberg after she seemingly dodged him a couple of times. A viral clip shows what's wrong with Britain, exposing deep divisions, and Labour finally scrap the two-child benefit cap. You can help us grow by visiting turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to help fund our work, or by becoming a YouTube member. But on to our first story. So finally, Zach Polanski faced Laura Koonsberg yesterday, and much of the focus of the conversation was on the economy.
You say there you can borrow. The government's already borrowing enormous amounts, and there is an already massive amount of national debt. And it's way more than the government spends every year, and it costs a fortune to pay the interest on that debt. So would you not put any limits on government borrowing?
Well, the first thing to say is debt to GDP ratio is at 100%. In Japan, it's 270%, and they have much better living standards than we do.
But in terms of this country, it's at the highest level it's been for a very, very long time. The financial markets are very sensitive to the decisions that the Chancellor makes. That's the case whether you'd like it or not. The UK's already got huge levels of debt. So are you suggesting that actually you'd be relaxed about the government borrowing much, much more?
Well, I think Andy Burnham was really interesting recently when he said we need to stop being in hock to the bond markets. And I think
And there was a market reaction.
Well, exactly. So what I think we need to do is get back to a place where actually democratic politicians who are elected by the people are more worried about the cleaners, the teachers, the nurses, the people on the ground who are actually creating the economy with their hands, rather than the people who hold these assets, who are making money while they sleep without actually working. That's deeply problematic. Now, are the markets important? Of course, they play a role, but much more important is the trust of the public on the politicians that they democratically elect. And we've gone so far the other way.
Now, a lot of the media talks about debt to GDP. And yes, it's currently at 100%, meaning that, we must curb spending, apparently. Yet, this graph shows that the current debt is nowhere near the peak. Notice where the spike is, which is our debt to GDP was 250%. That was the 1940s because, of course, we just had a very expensive war. It didn't stop us. We built the NHS, the welfare state, and council houses, improved the lives of millions. We are not constrained. We need to borrow to invest. So his political messaging, I think, is brilliant. And as we will acknowledge, messaging is everything. Now, he does slightly sidestep the question in regards to the bond markets. It's something that cannot be ignored. Now, what's strange about the financial markets is it's not what's true, but what's collectively perceived. And what I mean by that is we can't run out of money. It is true that we can print more into existence. Now, this isn't me endorsing endless quantitative easing, by the way, but I'm just explaining our economy. However, because the collective zeitgeist is that we have to rein in spending and that politicians, investors, and many mainstream economists believe controlling the deficits is important, then when a government increases the deficit, the markets potentially could be spooked. The markets are beholden to what people think, not what's reality. So that's an incredibly tricky thing. So whilst deficits, in my opinion, can be a good thing, as it essentially creates private wealth, if the lenders believe it to be bad, then we have less capacity to borrow from the market. It's why John McDonnell's approach with the 2017 and 2019 Labour manifesto was important. He went to the City of London. He spoke to the financiers. They went to the CBI and said, we are going to raise your taxes. This is our plan. We're going to raise taxes, spend it on public services. We have a long-term vision, and we're going to invest. We're going to invest in education. We're going to invest in public services, which, by the way, is good for business. You want a healthy workforce. You want a workforce that can get to work with better public transport, for example. Markets want stability, which is why Liz Truss crashed the economy. The quasi-quating budget spooked the markets because it came out of nowhere, right? She gave tax cuts to her mates. There was no long-term thinking. There was no economic strategy. She just wanted to give tax cuts to her mates, and the markets didn't like it. Rachel Reeves crying in Parliament spooked the market because lenders didn't know if they were going to deal with a different chancellor with a set of different policies. Now, can you explain that in 10 seconds in front of Laura Kay? Probably not, so I don't really blame Zach. Now they continue, and I think Zach really expresses himself well.
But the real world that we live in is that this country owes trillions of pounds to the financial markets, and therefore decisions that politicians take, don't they have to take that into account? You can't wish away the overdraft.
So I'm definitely not going to defend Liz Truss. I don't think anyone should. But actually, you said it really well. She was borrowing for unfunded tax cuts. What I'm talking about is borrowing for capital, infrastructure and investment that essentially creates spending multipliers that comes back into the economy. Second, though, in terms of the borrowing, a lot of that borrowing is from the Bank of England. That's money we owe to ourselves. It's not borrowing or debt in any real sense. Also, it's a lot of foreign countries who want to have that debt because actually that's a good investment for them because we have a relatively stable currency.
But before we get into, we could go down a really esoteric debate about economics.
It is important though, because
it is important.
Can I say one other thing on that though, on the esotericism?
Well, I want to ask you.
A household economy is nothing like a national budget, and we really need to break that metaphor.
And of course, it is not the same thing. But people look at the government in terms of what they borrow and what they spend and how they raise money through our taxation.
But we need to break that metaphor because it's a completely different way of looking at the economy, which is really important.
I just want to get a specific answer to that question, though. Do you believe there ought to be any limit on the amount that the government borrows? Would you say? Yes,
absolutely.
And where would you set it?
It depends on how many resources you have in the economy and also people who are able to use that resources. So you have to watch inflation, but that's not about how much you borrow. That's about the physical resources in a space. Once that's run out, then you're in a problem. But we're in a problem anyway because we face a climate crisis and an ecological emergency. And so we have literal physical barriers to the amount that we should be producing.
OK.
Now, 30% of our debt is to the Bank of England, which Zach is correct, is kind of, owing the money to ourselves. And I really appreciated how he tried to explain that our economy isn't a household debt, because it isn't, but he didn't really get to delve into that. I do find as well with Laura Kuenssberg saying, we could get all esoteric about the economy, but let's not have a real discussion about the economy. Let's go on to the pre-talking points I've got planned for you. We didn't use the clip, actually, but there is a bit in the Laura Kuenssberg segment where Zach Polanski is talking about wealth taxes, and Laura Kuenssberg says, I know you're talking about wealth taxes, so here's a chart on income taxes and why the very richest are paying the most. And it's like, well, I'm talking about wealth taxes. But what he did do was explain that most of our constraints are on resources and inflation. Now, there is a big debate on the economy within the left, MMT, which means modern monetary theory. It basically explains that because we have a sovereign currency, we have the capacity to print money. We have an endless supply of money, and constraint isn't on money, but on inflation. Now, I think MMT has some really interesting ideas, although I think there are more limits than just inflation and resources. We are still constrained to the market and market forces and how they behave. Now, look, I would love to get an MMT economist on in the future. Ideally, have two left economists, one MMT and one that opposes MMT, and have a real big debate. He also talked about spending multipliers, which is really important. Borrowing to invest is good. More investment, more jobs, and more economic activity. The next topic was about taxes, and this is where Zach really shines.
We just heard Hadi Alexander there strongly hinting that the limit on benefits for bigger families, known as the two-child benefit cap, is going to go. If that is swept away, is that a victory for the left, maybe including you? Absolutely.
It's something we've been calling for a long time. 1 in 3 children are living in poverty, and this would lift 300,000 children out of poverty almost immediately. It's absolutely outrageous it's taken the Labour government so long to do it. But if they do it, that'll be a victory and they'll celebrate it. More widely, though, we know that this Chancellor will keep talking about tough choices. But they always seem to be tough choices for people out of work or working people who are working really hard while their wages aren't going up, but food prices are going up. For disabled people, when are we going to see tough choices for multimillionaires and billionaires? It's time to tax for rich.
I mean, you really can't argue with him there. We always hear about tough choices, but never on those who actually carry the burden. The conversation shifted to where Zach may stand as an MP, and he didn't rule out a showdown with Keir Starmer.
And you've suggested that you'll stand as an MP in London. One poll showed that you could actually take the Holborn and St Pancras seat, which just happens to be the Prime Minister's constituency. Do you fancy taking him on?
I mean, it'd be very tempting to take Keir Starmer down. But actually, what I'm doing right now is really focusing on right across England and Wales, growing the Green Party. We've just hit 175,000 members.
But you are tempted to take him on, that's what you said.
I mean, I'm tempted to take on any Labour MP that's a disaster and ultimately replace them with a better MP who will stand for people and planet rather than vested interests.
I mean, that felt more like Koonsberg goading Zach to say yes to run in Holborn and St Pancras. He didn't say no, but not a yes either. But I'm not sure if it's a good idea for him to stand or go in Starmer's seat, if you ask me. Now, earlier today, I spoke to friend of the show, Helena, aka No Justice MTG, to discuss Zach Plansky's economic arguments. I wanted to ask about borrowing. 30% of our debt is to the Bank of England, the rest is to foreign investors, and Zach said that he agreed with Andy Burnham that we shouldn't be in hoc with the bond markets. Is he right?
Well, I think it's a complex question. So when we say things like in hoc to the bond markets, what Andy Burnham was referencing there was this idea that because we have stripped away state capacity, we are reliant on private investors and private finance to be able to provide the government with the means with which that they can issue those bonds, right? Insofar as if we had more state capacity, we had more public ownership, there was more revenue to the state from state-owned industries, for example, we wouldn't have to rely on having debt finance to engage in government spending. Of course, what Zach is saying is something that is different, which is that the government is already self-financing. We are the ones who issue our sovereign currency. Therefore, we don't have to rely on bond markets to engage in government spending. Now, you can make the choice to issue government bonds to finance spending if you want. You can maintain currency value, which I think is something that a lot of MMT proponents miss when they look at the overall macroeconomy, insofar as they want to spend money without issuing bonds, which you can and are perfectly able to do so and perfectly suggestible that you should do so. But you might see the currency fall if you issue too much. So you can issue bonds to ensure that there is always a buyer of that money, there's always a demand for it, so that you can maintain that currency value. But if you want to engage in bond-free spending, which Zach was saying, you can do that, but you have to worry, as most MMT proponents will tell you, about whether inflation is high or not, and if there is enough real resources in that economy that you can mobilize with that government spending. So those are two different things. And honestly, myself, I probably fall somewhere in between those two positions, like the MMT prescription about money being created by the state as a sovereign currency issuer. I think that's fundamentally true. Does that lead to the prescription that you can spend money as much as you want and there is no constraint other than inflation and resources? Well, I think currency value is something that is relevant. I think that there is a place for issuing government bonds, pension funds, etc. rely on access to stable government bonds. But at the moment, first of all, I think that we should be doing more in terms of what is known as monetary financing of government deficits, which is essentially just selling bonds directly to the Bank of England to finance government spending. And I think that we could be trying to rein in the Bank of England in doing what is known as quantitative tightening, where the current bonds that are held by the Bank of England that they bought using quantitative easing in the 2010s, or they traded financial instruments for government reserves, right? They are unwinding that by selling those bonds back onto the market, and that's increasing the interest that gets paid. Government spending, even if you want to take the mainstream approach that's being advocated by people like Andy Burnham or people like Andy Haldane on Laura Koonsberg's show, even if you take that mainstream approach, your government is still being hampered. The British government is still being hampered by the fact that the interest they are paying is going up because the current Bank of England is increasing the number of bonds they're selling back to bond investors, which means that the government is competing with its own central bank for people that they can sell those bonds and gilts to, which is a nonsense. That's a maniac proposal to me. And we're engaging a far more aggressive sell-off of government bonds from the central bank than any other country in the world. That has to stop too. So in answer, it's complex. It's a complex question.
So what do you make of his answer about debt being good for foreign investors? Because he seemed to be suggesting that buying our debt is good investment for them. What would you make of that?
Well, we have a very stable currency, right? Like obviously got a huge economy. We are a central part of the financial center of the world. Our balance of payments is being kept in check in large part because we deal, in terms of our financial sector, with countries around the world, everywhere, find our currency stable and our economy large. Second only, really, I guess, to like the euro and the dollar in terms of being a safe store of value. So this idea that there is just not a market for government debt, or that we'll suddenly be in a financial crisis of sorts because yields will get too high and our government bonds will spiral out of control. I found that to be a nonsense, and I think Zach was very good in pointing that out. That there will always be broadly a demand for pound sterling and bonds that are denominated in that currency because of how big our economy is, how central our economy has been to the world economy for the last century or so, and even before then, of course, before the dollar became the world's reserve currency. And so this idea that there is jitters in the financial markets for our bonds denominated in pounds, I think that's real nonsense. I think Zach was right to point it out.
I mean, this conversation inevitably has brought up MMT. You sort of reference it there. So Zach spoke about the real limits on the economy, right? It's not money, but it's inflation and resources. I think that's true in a sense that, yes, we literally create money, right? But of course, the biggest proponents of MMT say inflation, resources, that's the limits. I do think that because we are a global economy and we don't have the US hegemonic power, we still have to take the financial markets into account. What are your thoughts?
I think I would lie somewhere in between still. So it is basically true that no matter what your currency is, no matter where you are, you can still mobilize real resources by using government spending, especially if the private sector doesn't want to do that, or is there no scope for the private sector? Like, for example, very easy example of this in the UK is how many people that we currently have who are not working because they are sick. 40% of people who are signed off as not fit for work are on government waiting lists with the NHS. Engaging in any amount of fiscal expansion to increase healthcare provision, to get those people back into work, being productive, producing things for the economy, is a net benefit. That's a real resource that you can mobilize through state expenditure. That's fine. The limit comes to how your currency is related to the world economy. Like, so for example, you've seen inflationary crises in smaller countries around the world many times. They get brought up in the MMT conversation over and over and over again by people who oppose more government spending. You'll turn into Weimar Germany. You'll turn into Yugoslavia. You'll turn into Zimbabwe. Well, because they also had a really big problem where a lot of their debt was denominated in a foreign currency, insofar as their government spending was reliant upon having a good relationship between their own currency and the value of the dollar. And so by engaging in this expansionary policy, not having the real resources to mobilize, meant that they found it very difficult to repay those foreign debts. We don't have as much of that problem in the UK. We really don't have that much problem. Most of our debt is denominated in our own currency that we issue ourselves. So as long as you can keep that currency value reasonably stable and you're mobilizing these real resources, it really isn't a problem. And I think that's where a lot of these issues come into play. Like, there's a really similar dynamic remember when Greece went into financial crisis in the early 2010s? A lot of proponents of austerity said, well, if we don't do austerity, we'll end up like Greece. Well, no, because Greece was having their own spending denominated in euros, which is controlled by a central bank in Brussels. And their economy was so different to Germany in terms of how these people traded that they found themselves in a real problem of being able to pay that money back. We don't have that problem with a sovereign central bank, with a sovereign currency, where we get to denominate our own debt in our own currency. These are totally different from the situations that you see in the smaller countries that were reliant on the dollar, such as Zimbabwe and Weimar Germany, and in not the same way as Greece were in the early 2010s.
I mean, it was interesting thinking about where we could use quantitative easing. If we were to spend quantitative easing on like education and health, they have real world effects, as you sort of alluded to. Where quantitative easing could go wrong is if we were to use infrastructure projects when they're privatized, because would you see that's a kind of basically the UK government giving money to the rich? But also if we were to use quantitative easing to buy assets, could that also be inflationary? And should quantitative easing only be spent on things such as, like I said, public education and healthcare?
I mean, anything that would increase overall economic growth, I think, is something that you can justify using new money to spend on. Like, quantitative easing is when the central bank buys government bonds broadly, that could be from the market, from the state. So in terms of monetary finance of government deficits, is what happens when you sell bonds to the Bank of England, which you can now do now they're outside the European Union, fun fact. Then anything that will increase economic growth, increase the supply of goods and services in the economy. Because remember, inflation is a problem where demand outstrips supply, right? Aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Of course, it's never an exact science. Prices can be sticky. And so even if there is high demand, the prices may not change, at least as quickly as monetarists would expect them to. But even so, right, as long as what you're doing and you're spending on is overall increasing the productive capacity of the economy, which can come from making people healthier and more educated, but can also come from having infrastructure that allows our economy to be more dynamic enough to produce more things. Like if you have more public transport, that's an infrastructure investment. People will find it easier to commute and be able to be more productive at work, and therefore you will produce more things, and the demand and the supply will rise together and grow the economy forthwith, right? Like these are complex questions in terms of how we can and should spend money. But what it can't be spent on, at least not in an inflationary environment, is just giving money to people, like helicopter money, which is what was being described in the 2010s when we were in a liquidity trap and there was no demand at all. Demand is kind of less bad in terms of how it looks in the broader structure of the economy at the moment. So if you are going to spend money, you should be putting it into productive businesses, things that increase overall productive capacity, like infrastructure spending, or holistic state expenditure that makes people more productive, like healthcare and education. The one thing you can't do is just give money to people, at least not in my opinion. I'm not a Steve Keen when it comes to helicopter money.
Do you think there's anything, I mean, not particularly in the Laura Kuenssberg segment, do you think there's anything that Zach Polansky and the Green Party are missing when it comes to their economic arguments? I do note that Aditya Chakraborty did an article and talks about how basically the Green Party's policy isn't ambitious enough, and that basically they're taxing wealth policy of over £10 million will basically do nothing.
I mean, we need to have more public ownership, more worker ownership. I think that's a big factor of the problem. I think I agree fundamentally with Andy Burnham, trying to say that, well, the reason we're in this position of having to rely on financial markets is because we've stripped back the capacity of the state to self-finance by having infrastructure owned by the state. But the same is also true of regular working people, right? If we had more worker ownership, people would have more personal wealth themselves and wouldn't have to rely on the state as much too. So I think that's a bigger scope in terms of the way we can be looking at the economy. When it comes to the interview with Laura Kuenssberg, I think I would say my personal opinion on this is that when Zach said something like, oh, we can always borrow money, we can always self-finance, right? In response to a question about, well, what if the financial markets take a dislike to your policy? I think the response should be, because I believe that there should be at least some space for bond spending, even if I believe it shouldn't be everything, is that people want to buy government debt from the UK as long as they has a story as to how that money is being spent to make the country better. As long as you can guarantee to the bond markets that there will be a return on their investment, they will want to buy your bonds. And that's what I would do in response, right? The problem with Liz Truss, there was no story. There was, quite frankly, a weekend where she just went, we're doing all these things, why? Don't know, but because we think it'll be good, at a time when pension funds were over leveraged and when the Bank of England had started quantitative tightening, and it led to this kind of unique maelstrom of collapse. The same is true of Rachel Reeves and Labour. They have no vision, they have no story, they have no plan to sell to the bond markets. In fact, the fact they keep doing these slapdash briefings and smorgasbord approaches to policy whilst fundamentally telling the public they're doing basically what the Tories did makes it look like they don't know what they're doing, potentially because they don't, and it's all last minute because they spent 5 years getting the left out of politics rather than formulating a prospectus for government. And the bond markets don't like that. What John McDonnell did in the run-up to the election in 2017 and 2019, and what the Greens are doing now, what they should be doing to a greater extent, is saying, this is our plan for how we make our economy better. This is how we're going to pay for it through government spending. There will be a return for investors because of the extra productive capacity that our industrial policy will have into things like green energy, and our public works programs will have in terms of the broader health of the public realm. And that is why you'll get a return, because our country will be better at the end of our spending plans. That's how you can tell, even if you want to do bond spending, the investors in those bonds, why they'll get a return. And it's this holistic story about why the country will be better. But Rachel Reeves doesn't have that, and Liz Truss certainly didn't have that either.
That was Helena, aka No Justice MTG. As if I have to tell you guys, you know who she is. She's a superstar. But make sure you subscribe to her on YouTube and all the socials using the name No Justice MTG. But on to our next story. A clip has gone viral that shows that Britain has a huge problem. TikTok creator The Mike Guy interviewed two men who spoke about immigration, only to be interrupted by a woman who attacked immigrants.
What do you think about immigration?
Immigration, everybody's entitled to live where they want. Everybody's entitled to have a house. Everybody's entitled to eat food. You know, I'm not racist, but you know, as far as immigration, everybody's more than welcome to come and live wherever they want. Yeah. That's my.
Take all our fucking houses. Yeah, we'll say that into the mic. I'm disabled and I'm fucking homeless, mate. Yeah. All these foreign bastards keep coming over and taking our houses, so I will say it into the fucking mic. Yeah, I will.
Yeah. So basically, has your PIP been cut?
I don't claim. I've no address to claim.
You don't. So has your PIP been cut? Because.
I don't get PIP.
So has your housing benefit been cut?
I've not got a house. I haven't got any benefit with no house. I'm homeless. I sleep on the concrete.
No, you don't, love.
Do I not?
No, you can't do because you got a fucking wheelchair.
I can get on the floor, you fucking prick.
Oh, can you? Right, that's one for your PIP assessment. She can get on the floor.
Got one leg.
She can get on the floor. Hey, so that means you can get up out your wheelchair, you can get onto the floor, that means you can get into the job centre, you can go look for work and you can sign on.
To live and I'll get a fucking house, I'll get a job, yeah?
My love.
Give me somewhere to live and I'm willing to work. I'm willing to work, mate.
So get up, get to the job centre and get yourself in work.
No, get a house first. Yeah, how can I go to the job dirty as well?
Job centre like this.
Yeah.
Ask the job centre. Ask the job centre for a flexible support grant.
No fucking address. You cannot claim with no address.
Support grant, yeah. We'll get you your washing to get into work. They will pay £25 a week for your washing to get done, so you can go to work.
I didn't know that.
Well, now you do.
Right.
Thank you so much, madam. I appreciate your time, man. Thank you.
No need to be fucking on that. But I do get fucking.
Right. I mean, I guess I like the handshake at the end, but I mean, you see that's a microcosm of the entire issue of Britain. You know, the elites are laughing because this is exactly what they want. Blaming immigrants, the other blaming disabled people. No one blames the political and financial elite. No one blames the system. This is the epitome of crab mentality. Our country has this. We prefer to tear each other down in order to get ahead. I mean, when we realize we can't get ahead, we bring them down with us. I mean, if you haven't heard of crab mentality, you may have seen videos of sort of buckets with crabs in them. None of them can escape, not because they can't, but those who are nearing the edge of the bucket get pulled down by other crabs. You know, if I can't escape, neither can you. This is our country's mentality to a T. But we really need to talk about this. You know, we are being played. The billionaire class, the politicians, this is what they want. They want politics to be like this forever. You know, never-ending fighting amongst the 99% whilst the wealthiest get richer. It's immigrants' fault. Oh, it's being on PIP. Wow, it's the 99% being destroyed by, what, the top 1%. Louisa, of course, the media and politicians have created this political climate, but on a deeper level, why do you think this is happening?
So obviously we know like divide and conquer has always been the best tool of the ruling classes to enforce the status quo. And they use this because obviously the working class has its powers in numbers. The last thing you want the 99% to do is gain class consciousness, obviously, and unify against the 1%. Like the 1% will lose. So ideology is used to keep them in check, doesn't it? So obviously ideology is like the realm of ideas, or Gramsci calls it cultural hegemony. And the undercurrents of ideology, obviously capitalism, is called upon when capitalism is in need. So according to Marx, who I've seen has been in the background the whole time, the struggle under capitalism will lead to class consciousness and the overthrowing of the elites, right? And the birth of socialism, you know, will happen. But the reverse is obviously is happening. Like we're going back to a feudal time, and we're seeing fascism. But capitalism is predicated and built on racism, fundamentally. So when capitalism is in crisis, the working classes are struggling. They will turn up the volume on racism to distract you from gaining class consciousness. And a few theorists have talked about this. Aimé Césaire, he's like a post-colonial theorist, and he talks about the fascist boomerang effect. So obviously fascism exists within capitalism anyway, like it exists in the way that we colonize other countries and, globalization, we export sort of labor and stuff. Like that fascism still exists, but it's unseen. When capitalism is in need and in crisis, then it will do a boomerang back to the colonizer's country and be used on the colonized people themselves, so that the colonizer population, which I think is a really interesting concept here, definitely probably what we're seeing. But with neoliberalism in particular, the ideology not only exploits you, but it really humiliates you. Because it gives you only yourself to blame, which obviously scapegoats become extremely desirable in this political climate. Neoliberalism is this invisible hand, isn't it? It's made to feel like it's a natural. We talk about this like the markets are spooked, like the markets are some sort of like godly, spiritual thing that it's so natural, we can't understand it, and that inability to understand it is really the issue here, I think, and kind of exactly my project in trying to be able, to get people to feel empowered in knowing what's going on, because when people give it a face, this invisible hand, when they give it a face or a race, that makes them feel more powerful, when they feel powerless. That's why aggrieved people will choose authoritarian leaders. They'll choose like the strong man because they feel weak. They want someone to blame. So it frees them from feeling the full brunt of the exploitation of neoliberalism or capitalism, because they can always take comfort as well in the fact that someone else has it worse, which is why racism, really thrives in this kind of environment. And it creates a false consciousness as well, that the harder you work, obviously, like the smarter you are or whatever, the more you will be rewarded. So any kind of win in this game, this extremely competitive environment, even if it means putting other groups down, like people of colour or women, you'll take that win. And there's nothing more powerful than aggrievement and wounded egos. And I think that's what we're seeing here with scapegoating, racism, transphobia, misogyny, white male victimhood, all those kind of things. I think that's exactly how I would put it as somebody who does theory. That's what I'm seeing at the minute.
I want to ask about Marx, actually. Was Marx wrong in terms of class consciousness?
Well, I'm going to say I said this on my TikTok, and oh my God, the Marxists came after me, so I'm going to be careful.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Marxist battle. We've got Marx above my shoulder. He's going to be angry, but
yeah, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I love you, Marx. But I think the theory wasn't wrong. It was underdeveloped. I think Gramsci sort of answered the question, because what he relied on was class consciousness here, and class consciousness is not happening. That's kind of where we've run into issues with the Marxist, the German ideology. And he says that this revolution or whatever is predicated on material conditions, but the material conditions, if class struggle creates revolution, then aren't we struggling enough? Like, why hasn't the revolution happened? And I think that's the issue here, is the fact that we are this manufactured ignorance, about the economy, about the issues in society. This manufactured ignorance is keeping us from the revolution and from socialism. So, I think we need to maybe look to people like Gramsci, who talk about how we can capture this cultural hegemony, the ideas, because as much, I am a theorist, I do like ideas. I like the idea that ideas can change the debate. I mean, why else would we be doing this? Like, you have to create dialogue and conversation and stuff. And I think this is a situation we're in. We're in desperate need of changing the dialogue, changing the conversation, changing the ideas, and then we can use that to organize and change the material conditions.
I mean, as a Marxist myself, as someone who does see a lot of things through the material lens, kind of what happens when you're Marxist, I'm having to grapple with culture. And because we're seeing more radical elements of politics emerge, we're seeing the far right and radical right, which is everything about them is cultural, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to believe that, change isn't done by understanding people's material conditions. Of course, we need class consciousness, and where I agree with you, where Marx is undeveloped, not wrong, but underdeveloped, which is that class consciousness hasn't come about because of our material conditions. A lot of change happens, even when it's material change, happens through culture. When we look at unions, for example, I mean, I think the reason why we had strong unions and this idea of standing up for yourself was embedded through culture. The culture of not being bullies, the culture of actually we're going to stand together. Yeah. We're not going to be trampled on by bosses. And the way Thatcher changed that culture of individualism means that even though our material conditions comparatively is worse than maybe when it was in the 70s, actually it is worse when it comes to wages, the same response of collectivism and unionization hasn't come together because Thatcher changed the culture of individualism. And even though the conditions are there in which we should have you could say a revolution, or at least political revolution, is not being met. So actually, maybe us Marxists need to sort of grasp with the idea in which the right wing seems to be doing very well, is that framing everything through culture. I think this is where, when it comes to immigration, they've been less successful saying immigration's taking your jobs, immigration is killing wages. I'm not saying it's unsuccessful. A lot of people buy into that. But now we've seen a shift from the right wing. They're not making the economic argument against immigrants. They're now saying, actually, these people are rapists. These people are dangerous. They're watering down our culture. Very insidious stuff, but it seems to be having a lot more impact.
Yeah, I think what you said that, Marx didn't see Thatcher coming, clearly,
No.
And she said, one of her most famous quotes is, "The economics is the method, but the goal is to change the heart and soul."
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that's exactly what she's done, and that's exactly why it's so difficult now to see these material conditions change, because she's already made us all into these little projects. We see ourselves as little businesses or something that we need to always optimize. People wear like Apple watches that tell them what percentage their body is on or their tiredness is on. Like, we have to always be checking emails, and I think that overwhelming self-optimization and like the entrepreneurialism of the self, the entrepreneur is hailed as this like sacred being in neoliberal society, isn't it? Like, we should all become entrepreneurs. If only we knew how to manage our finances properly and all that kind of stuff. Like, that has led to this hugely competitive dog eat dog sort of environment where it is very, very difficult to unify and create an organization and organize to overcome those conditions, because it's become so ingrained within us. And I think that's going to be, when she did indeed say that she changed the heart and soul, that is incredibly difficult to tackle.
We are a nation of petty bourgeois instead of a nation of workers versus the 1%. I mean, a lot of us on the left have tried to counter this narrative by saying, hey, look, don't blame immigrants, don't blame disabled people or the unemployed. It's the elites. And that is the message the left have been pushing for a very long time. A lot of people aren't finding that convincing. And I think fundamentally, especially when it comes to immigration, it's very emotive. So what do you think about that? It's getting some people. I mean, of course, Zach Polanski's Green Party surged to number 2. But I still find, even when I'm having everyday conversations with people, I say, don't blame immigrants, all right? Don't blame people on benefits. It's the elites. Yeah. And they're not convinced. So why do you think they're not becoming convinced with that? And also, what do you think we need to do? What sort of strategy do we need to do to change people's minds? I appreciate it's a very tough question.
Well, I actually wrote my PhD on this, so it's not that the question's tough, is that there is so much to be said on this. And, my PhD was on nostalgia and politics. And nostalgia is a feeling. Like you said, this is about emotions. When it's about emotions, it's very difficult to just get people to think their way out of a feeling. You know what that's like. If somebody tells you, oh, don't stress, I'm cured. You know, it's very, very difficult to sort of overcome that. And even Freud himself has said, you know, if you confront the emotion with the truth as such, it makes no difference. So you can tell people the truth, but it will make no difference.
This is Zach Palan.
Don't have if you don't have an emotion to replace that with. So I think, speaking of Zach Polanski, he is a great example of how we can talk about hope. You know, we need to replace that emotion with that emotion, because the emotion here is loss. Okay, loss of stability, loss of security, certainty, community being probably the most important. And if we don't begin to ask questions and think critically about these emotions, then they can be repurposed by people like Nigel Farage. Like I was saying before, you know, aggrievement and wounded egos is really, really dangerous. And the thing is, like, these emotions are completely valid. Like, we should feel angry. We should feel like we've lost, because we have. Like, neoliberalism has meant we've lost our community centres, the stability of the NHS, housing. But we need to make that invisible hand visible to people. You know, we need to tackle the false consciousness of this system. And it does actually mean we have to do it in a compassionate way, I think, which is probably the most difficult bit. You know, I really struggle with my nana when she's telling me all sorts of, you know, blaming the immigrants or whatever. But we need to validate those feelings, because it's not the feeling that is wrong, it's the way that it's being manipulated by people like Farage and Reform. And I think as well, like, we need to start asking very fundamental questions about the future and the present, and really aggressively imagine a better future than the present, because that's really the issue. I think we face such a problem with imagination. You know, I don't know if anybody's seen the film Children of Men. That's exactly what that's about. It's this: the future can't be born. There are no more new ideas. And funnily enough, it becomes this really like anti-immigrant, nationalist, like extremely hostile environment to outsiders, because when you don't have a future to look to, then you will look to the past. And that is the politics of fascism. You know, all politics is geared towards the future. That is the nature of politics. It's all about changing imagining a better future. But when fascism is all about the past, it just becomes about revenge. And that's what's happened when you can't see the future, when the future looks so bleak, like Zach Polanski was saying about, you know, the climate crisis, and Gen Z are now like the most depressed generation to have ever existed. And, you know, the inequality is 1,000 times worse than during like the 14th century. Like there's no question as to why this is the feeling that, you know, the past probably was better. In fact, under Keynesian economics, you would argue that it was. But we aggressively need to imagine a better future and ask really basic questions about what we want, because revenge gets you nowhere. You know, it's a feeling, and it might be comforting, but ultimately it's an end in itself. It will lead nowhere. And if we look to the last round of the 1930s fascism, well, we know where it leads, and it's just destruction, self-destruction, and appeal to ego. So yeah, I think the solution is really holding on to hope, holding on to compassion. And again, one of my favorite theorists, Hannah Arendt, she talks about this idea. It's called amor mundi, and it means loving the world in Latin or something. And it's this idea that you love the world enough to want to change it. And I think we really need to hold on to that spirit. And she wrote that in this book, which I really recommend to everyone in this climate. Is called Men in Dark Times. I feel like we can all, you know, resonate. But Yeah, I think we really need to hold on to our humanity here and what we want for our children, what we want as a, as a collective, because that, I think, truly is what has been lost.
I would really like to, in the new year, have a sort of theory video podcast. I mean, for a long, long time, I've wanted to make Marxist content. It's just time.
Yeah.
A lot of politics is wrapped up in the day in today and in the news. But I definitely am interested in getting a video podcast of political theory, and I think I mean, you'd be a good addition to that, I can tell you. Hey, that was absolutely fantastic, though. I mean, I could speak about this for the rest of the show, but there is more to talk about. But before we continue, I just want to remind our viewers that we are 5 volunteers keeping this ship going. We do this around our paid jobs. Our goal is to become full-time, meaning we can increase our content, be far more ambitious, and build a sustainable left-wing alternative, and maybe we can get that theory podcast going. Your help has made so much of a difference already, from equipment to covering rallies and interviews. Your support means everything. We rely on small donations. So if you want to be part of a media organization that seeks to destroy the oligarchs, then please head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can support us monthly on Patreon, or there is another link to a one-time contribution. You can also become a YouTube member for 99p. We also want to announce that we are exclusively live streaming Zara Sultana's Eve of Your Party conference. The event will include speakers from unions and left organisations. You can watch it live right here from 8 p.m. on Friday. Make sure you don't miss that. But on to our final story. Rachel Reeves has finally caved in and will scrap the 2-child benefit cap, along with also giving a boost to pensioners. The Chancellor has made the decision to scrap the 2-child limits in let me rewind. The Chancellor has made the decision to scrap the 2-child limits in full, a move that will be welcomed by Labour MPs who have long highlighted its effect on increasing child poverty. So, after all this time, after removing the whip off MPs who voted against the cap, after the Child Poverty Action Force Quango, Labour are doing what the left said they should be doing all along, scrapping a policy which is the leading cause of child poverty. But of course, she couldn't do it without wanting to look tough on the most vulnerable. As she seeks to head off criticism, Reeves will say she plans to bring in an extra $1.2 billion in savings by identifying incorrect universal credit payments up to 2031. A Treasury source said, "We will never tolerate fraud, error or waste in the welfare system. Every pound of taxpayers' money should be spent with the same care with which working people spend their own money." Reeves is also looking to give pensioners a boost. Rachel Reeves is expected to announce a higher-than-inflation rise for 13 million pensioners in her upcoming budget. People on the full rate of the new state pension will benefit with more than £550 a year more. Now, look, I oppose the scrapping of the winter fuel allowance. I believe in the idea of universalism. However, I mean, when do young people get a break? I'm really sick of living in a gentocracy. Along with these changes, Reeves is also set to bring in a set of tax rises, freezing income tax thresholds for an extra 2 years to 2030, then bringing more people into higher tax bands as wages rise, making salary sacrifice schemes less generous, including those for pension contributions, a pay per mile scheme on electric cars to help fill the tax gap from petrol duty as more people opt for green vehicles. This is the main one, and bringing in higher tax on the most expensive properties, including a surcharge on the highest value houses. The surcharge will reportedly the surcharge will reportedly be targeted at homes worth more than £2 million after worries that a lower £1.5 million threshold would hit too many in the southeast. Oh, the £1.5 million houses in the southeast. Can't hit them, people. Now, look, I welcome the increased taxes on expensive properties, but look, it's still a drop in the ocean. A proper wealth tax is missing. Louisa, what do you make of these budget policies?
Well, I agree with you, Curtis. I think it's just not enough. Like, we need a complete reform of the way that we're taxing and we're funding things, and this is simply not going to go far enough. We need an exit tax. We need a wealth tax, and £2 million on properties. Like, it's not that much. We need a complete reform. And what's going to happen is, once again, the middle class, the working class are going to feel the brunt of this, and the economy is going to get worse because they are not doing anything that's going to truly revolutionize anything. So that's going to play into the hands of reform. This aggrievement is going to get worse. The economy is going to get worse for working class people and the middle class. And that's going to just lead to more anger and also powerlessness. If people feel like we did vote for Labour, we thought we voted for change, we thought we didn't vote for a Tory government. And there are good things in this budget, obviously. Like, I'm glad she's got rid of, making children pay. But it's simply not good enough in terms of it's going to allow reform to get in if she doesn't radically, change things. And I think that's what we really, really need to be aware of, is that reform will win. If we don't start doing something about this, if we don't start demanding a wealth tax, then this will completely play into their hands. Because again, it's about emotion, and it's not felt in terms of reading these policies. The people are not going to read these policies generally. The people that we saw in that video are not going to read them policies. They're going to feel that when they go to the shop, things are more expensive, and that's going to be frustrating. When people's benefits are cut, they're going to feel that. These are all feelings, and if we don't tackle those feelings and say, right, okay, how can we talk about what has been lost here? That is just going to lead to more anger and more rage. And once again, we'll see that being fueled in terms of and captured through anti-immigration, through racism. And we have to tackle this. And we can't see the economy and these racial, these racist, in the media, rhetoric as two separate things. Like, they're going hand in hand here. And we need to demand wealth taxes because they're not clearly they're not going to do it themselves. So I just think it's a start, but it's absolutely not good enough.
I mean, the Labour Party are in such deep trouble because, I mean, you mentioned this. It is almost nothing they can do because they haven't told a story. Before the election, their pledge essentially was, I mean, look, it had on the manifesto with Keir Starmer's face, had change plastered all over it. But generally, the campaign was, hey, look, we're just not as bad as the other guys, and we're going to manage the economy better. They didn't create a story, which is we are going to raise taxes on the very wealthiest to pay for X public services. That is a story they could have went into the election with, and then they could have implemented those policies. The problem now is, because political messaging transcends policies, unfortunately. Like, the people you referenced in that video, are they going to go through the budget with a fine-tooth comb? No, they're not. It's stories and messaging that resonates with people, not just, oh, we're going to put taxes on £2 million property, or properties worth £2 million. They are going to sprinkle in, I think, some good policies. I think that the increasing the taxes on properties is good. Not enough, but it's good. That's just, no one's going to listen to that, because from the very beginning, they didn't say we are going to redistribute wealth and power. Now, when it comes to reform, for example, they've set a story that even, and this is obviously part of the media's fault, that even Nigel Farage a couple of weeks ago basically said, oh, we're going to completely ditch our economic policy of cutting taxes. We're now just going to do 14 years of, we're now going to do austerity of what the Conservatives did of the last 14 years. And no one's going to really buy into that. No one's going to care, because they already know what reform stand for. They're already emotionally invested in reform, despite the fact that they've turned around and said, actually, we're going to govern like Conservatives the way they did in the last 15 years. And it's the same with the Labour Party. They can almost say and do whatever they want now. They've lost that goodwill nature, and they haven't created a narrative or a story because Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney and Rachel Reeves have zero political communication skills.
Mm-hmm.
They have zero.
Yeah. And, you know, the one thing people like about Nigel Farage is he speaks to me. You know, that's what people say. He speaks to us. He speaks our language. And this is the problem with the, you know, with the left or with Labour, if you even want to regard them in that way, is that we don't have this language in which we can talk to. People feel disempowered. People feel disenchanted. You know, disenchantment last time led to the rise of fascism. It's happening again. But this disenchantment isn't the death of God, you know, like it was last time. And it's a new death. It's a slow death of the community, of what we've thought of as, you know, as Britain, as home, in the last 50 years. And I think it's a really, really dangerous place. And I was speaking to one of my colleagues here at Warwick, because he did a talk on like censorship, and he lived in Yugoslavia during, you know, the dictatorship and stuff. And he was saying, you know, we have a very, very small window of opportunity to turn it around, because if we don't start changing the discourse and the storytelling, somebody else, you know, will use that the people feel, you know, powerless to their own advantage and make them feel like they are voting for power, when, you know, it is obviously only going to make them more disempowered. But we can't let it get that far, because that could be the end of democracy. Like, I don't want to be dramatic, but you know, I've looked at the literature, and it's very, very, very scary. So we absolutely need to be changing the story, the narrative. And Keir Starmer, you know, give me a call and do anything. You know what I mean? Like, it is, like you said, it is so much to do with that, with the lack of narrative that we have. And people need a story. People need a story about the future to hold on to. Otherwise, if you just keep telling the same story about the past was better, well, I'm afraid you can't go back to the past. That's not how time works. You know, that's not how history plays out. And when you do try and do that and you dig up the dead, well, you're going to get haunted by some pretty nasty ghosts. And that's the position that we're in.
Here's a story for you. The Labour Party is destroyed. The Green Party, along with your party, take over as the left opposition, because Labour are toast. And even if they come out with the best policies and the best arguments, no one trusts them. And nor should we lend them our vote because of the horrific things they've done, including supporting a genocide. That's my story. And on that note, I think we're going to go to our comments. Let's bring in Ben McLean, who's in the driving seat. Behind the scenes driving seat, shall I say?
Behind the scenes driving seat. Okay, that was quite a way to introduce me. Yeah, no, excellent show, guys. Really, really well done. You are 100% correct about narrative. We've been saying it for a long time. Narrative. It's all about the story you are telling. It absolutely is. Absolutely is. So let's just get through the super chats and money stuff first. So we have. Sorry, I'm scrolling quite far. The Good Globalist, excellent name, gave 10 Turn Left memberships. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Can I not make that on screen? There we go.
Okay.
Gifted 10 Turn Left memberships. Thank you so much, The Good Globalist. You absolute star. That is fantastic, and a fantastic name, of course. And Steve Mc81 gave 10 Turn Left memberships.
Generous chat tonight.
Yeah, we've got a lovely chat. It's probably because we've got two lovely and excellent commentators in the front seats. Okay, and Deus that's I know that profile picture. Gifted 10 Turn Left memberships, not the name you usually go under.
Yeah, no, you've changed your name, haven't you? Changed his
yes.
name.
I don't want to say it just in case they don't want me to say.
Yeah.
All right, CPND gifted 10 Turn Left memberships. I don't know why 10 is the number tonight, but 10 is the number apparently. 10 is fantastic. 10 is very generous. Yeah. I think I am gonna attribute this mostly to Louisa,
because she's once again. I'm seeing in the comments now. Louisa was excellent. Hopefully to be a regular. We hope so too. Incredible.
Yeah, I hope so.
No pressure. No pressure, Louisa.
Yeah, no pressure.
Right. And Jonathan Valentine became a YouTube member. Thank you so much. And we also have. Oh, can I? Wick de Wiz.
Wicked Wiz.
Wicked Wiz. That's not how you say that. Who gave £2. Thank you so much, mate. That's excellent. Thank you for that. You absolute stars. We've got real generosity in our chat. We really appreciate all of you. It makes everything that we do here possible. It really does. I've accidentally started a comment now. Also, we know there's not many of you. We know you are few and far between, but we do appreciate that somebody with the username Genocide Joe is in the Twitch chat.
One of our maybe four viewers on Twitch. I'm so glad we brought up a Twitch comment finally.
Yes, yeah.
Hello from YouTube all the way to Twitch. You're not alone.
Yes, if you want a comment definitely to be brought up, probably best comment it on Twitch because we've got so few people on Twitch. But we love you for coming across. It is absolutely excellent. Flowsnake said, this isn't a journalist interviewing a politician. It's two politicians debating policy. Laura, if you want to be a politician, be honest about it and stand for election. Do we have anything particularly to say about media and the role the media has played in getting us to this position and how we might go about solving it?
You can take this one, Louisa. You start off. You start off.
Well, I think the media has a lot to answer for in terms of the rise of the far right, to be honest. And like we were saying, this storytelling narrative, like if we just look at the amount of coverage that people like Nigel Farage have been given compared to people like Zach Polanski, I think that's a massive problem. And obviously we live in like an attention economy now. What is interesting and what is clickable and what gets, the views is like scandal and this sort of like really aggravated language and stuff. Hope is a little bit boring to people. They don't, people enjoy like a sense of, punching down and the aggravation and things like that. And I think, the mainstream media don't do a very good job at all of actually just providing important information because they're really at the vanguard and the forefront of this cultural hegemony thing that the class consciousness. They are really powerful tools. So, we can just look at who they're owned by, who the BBC, the thing is, this is kind of a funny comment because, the guy who owned the BBC or the CEO, he used to be like the Tory communications officer. Yeah. Like that is absurd. How is a politician? He owns the media. He's running it. He's the top boss. So obviously, it's all going to be filtered through this politics, and that's really problematic. And while information is never unbiased, like it's never just what you tell people and what you don't tell people is always a political choice, no matter what. So I think it's not that helpful to call, say unbiased media, but it's about giving people, enough information. And I think that's not what we're giving them. We're giving them, a fairly right-wing, view of things. And I think that's sort of what Laura Kunsberg was doing here.
I think Flowsnake, that's a really good comment because the way you framed it, Laura Kunsberg being a politician, because the way in which our mainstream media acts, they want to act like they're sort of non-partisan arbiters behind a sort of glass wall. The politicians fight. We're just here to report the facts, but you need to understand, like, the media and people within the media are also very political. They play a role. And it is up to journalists what role they want to play. They can look. No one can not be biased. That's impossible to do. And what I find very frustrating, which is part of the reason why Turn Left exists, is I'm sick and tired of balanced reporting. And you might think, well, that sounds like a good thing, right? But nothing is free from bias. And when people say, no, we're being balanced, but sometimes you can sort of bring on an opinion that isn't worthy. isn't a good sort of policy or give a good argument, but they have to bolster it in the interest of balance. I'm interested in objective reporting, whether something's just factually true or whatever. And I think the way in which the media try and paint themselves as apolitical and not part of the arena is fundamentally a lie. And I think Flowsnake calling Laura Kuenssberg a politician, and actually it's not a journalist versus a politician, it's two politicians. I think that's actually a really fantastic way of putting it.
And also, like, I think people don't actually want unbiased media. Like, I tell my students, like, no, you don't want that. You want to understand. If you understand the bias, you get twice the amount of information there. You know, and that's the point about critical thinking. Like, if you can understand where that information is coming from, you get two lots of information. You get the information that's being reported, and you get information about the people that, you know, the interests that is reporting it. And I think that's really important. We should be empowering people to understand the biases and understand where they come from, you know, rather than demanding unbiased media, because you're going to read it through a biased lens. You know, we can't just say there is objective truth, you know, that there isn't. You know, everything has to be understood through a critical lens, and if you don't provide people with a critical lens, then it's all biased towards the ruling class, because they'll decide, you know.
Yeah, I do think we have to see our media as not, because I think there's a tendency for our media to think of themselves as outside of politics, and it's particularly ironic when it comes to like the Laura Kuenssbergs, the Beth Rigbys, the people who like that they basically, you know, that they are dependent upon their access to Westminster. Like, that is who they are, and they're caught up in Westminster gossip. Like, I've heard Aaron Bastani critique this so many times, and it is 100% true. But it's also true more widely for the media that they are political actors, and as such, as people who shape our politics, surely the commitment should be to like have a positive influence on the information sphere. And the only way that you can have an a positive influence on the information sphere is by approaching it from a distributive justice perspective. And John Rawls, who of course, like, distributive justice, like, theory largely we owe to John Rawls. The ideas that, and I put this to Sangeeta Maiska when I interviewed her, because she asked me about bias in the BBC. John Rawls' difference principle, the idea that inequalities within society should benefit the least advantaged the most, and the most advantaged the least. That is a much better guiding principle for clear journalistic integrity than the idea that the idea that you're just impartial and you pretend like you're a third party observing politics rather than an active participant. But I'm going to get caught up in my own bullshit.
Well, I was going to say, because the fundamental role of the media is to challenge power. That's why we have the media. And in a way, you have to take that principle, which is to benefit the sort of the poorest in society the most and the richest the least, right? Because the role of the media is to take on powerful interests, powerful politicians, and scrutinize them. And part of that is standing up for the very poorest in society, because it's amplifying voices that maybe they don't have a platform themselves. But unfortunately, what we've kind of got is we'll have someone kind of represent the working class, but not really, but whatever. Then you've got someone who represents the ruling class, and the media will act like it's sort of an even-handed power dynamic, when it's really, really not. I would argue there shouldn't be anyone in the media who talks in favor of the ruling class, because the point of the media is to criticize the ruling class. It's a fundamental flaw with our current media setup, but the way to tackle it is democratic media. Because of course what we have is the BBC, which is, it kind of acts like the corporate media. Then we've got the billionaire-owned media. What do we do about that? Do we just suddenly make it left-wing? It's not really the case, is it? We can't just make it left-wing. It's not really how it works anyway. But you want democratic media. You want to abolish corporate media. You want to abolish, well, ideally abolish billionaires. But abolish corporate media and then have a democratic BBC.
I think as well, like, look at the people within journalism a lot of the time in mainstream media. I was speaking to the girls on Media Storm last week, and they were talking about how it's so like everybody's basically privately educated. It's the same in academia. What's the likelihood that somebody's going to sound like me on BBC? Like, it's not likely. So you can't represent the people or challenge power when you're only employing the kids of the people in power and the status quo. So I think that's a big issue with it as well. And I think a good way of, like, I think we should really try and support like local media and things like that, because I know, like, that they don't have this huge funding, but I think it's when it is like more organized in terms of like a smaller group and stuff, that they do genuinely. I know Rochdale in particular, shout out Roach Valley Radio. They're really trying to tackle the far right in Rochdale in these groups and stuff.
Local
And they're
journalism
going
is very
alone.
important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, just give Turn Left the BBC contract. Just like the whole of the BBC's news coverage. We'll just give it to Turn Left.
Yeah.
And I promise you,
give us what I said about democratic media. Let's
Yeah,
just take
exactly.
over the media hegemony.
give us a week. Give us a week. We'll have Louisa's grandma reading the Morning Star. Like, give us a week. Come on. Okay.
Now that's TV.
So let's get a few more comments in. So Cymru put some comments in the chat, and they said some stuff I disagreed with, but there was one that I really agreed with. And that is funny how there's a magic money tree for Westminster, but only cuts for our devolved budgets. I think it's only cuts, to be fair, across the board. But you're right that cuts do tend to hit devolved powers more, because, of course, they want to be able to blame the devolved governments, because they're typically not the same government as the government in Westminster, because the Scottish and Welsh and Irish, don't forget, typically have more kind of left-wing governments. Typically, not always. And can't wait to be independent and in control of our own currency. It's important to say another aspect of that, of the magic money tree, is, of course, the one area that devolved powers don't have autonomy is in foreign policy. Like, that's part of the deal of devolved powers. They don't have control over their own foreign policy, and there is always more money to bomb people. Like, that's always a thing. I don't know if you guys want to add anything on that. We should probably get through a few questions, but no.
I mean, I'd love to, but I think we probably should get through more comments.
Cool. So Natalie said, I don't get how we have a debt to the Bank of England, yet we've had to bail them out twice since 2008. It is interesting, isn't it? Yes. And Specs Bean Farmer rightly points out, I'm guessing it's already been recorded, but she, Helena, is going to be on Zach's podcast on Friday. Do not miss that.
Yes.
I mean, that is so exciting. I had a hint she was going to be on there, because the way she used to answer the question, they'd be like, she wouldn't give us an answer. So, yeah, definitely tune into Bold Politics then with Helena on there.
Go on, Helena.
Yeah. So during the video in the I can't remember whether it was the second story. Was it the second story of the video of the
yes, the Mike Guy video? Yeah.
Paul King said Farage's people watch them all whine when he makes them pay 10k a year for healthcare. There is a real problem on the horizon with people not understanding that Farage is going to make their lives worse. Are there any narratives that we can sort of put across that you think are particularly effective in turning people against Farage, particularly?
I think the NHS one is a really. I mean, everybody loves the NHS. Like me, people. It's such a. It's like a war spirit in Britain. The NHS. It really. People think that Britain is the only place with an NHS. Like, we all stood outside and clapped for it for like 2 years, and I think, if there is one thing you want to argue with a reform, or you want to make them aware of, it's what he will do to the NHS. Because obviously what they have done, it's not explicit. This is the point. In the policy, it's not explicit. It says they will cut taxes for private healthcare, and it doesn't say that it's going to cut spend. It says it'll cut public spending. Well, it doesn't specifically say it's going to destroy the NHS, but that's exactly what it means. So you have to really make people aware that this has already happened to dentistry in the NHS. That was an experiment. What they could do to neoliberalize the NHS. It's already been done there, and it will continue. And across the world, people take the mick out of British people for our teeth. Like, it's a known thing. George Orwell wrote about it. It's this thing. It will become so prevalent, and 40,000 people die every year in the US because they don't have health insurance. Like, they fall out, people with who have teeth falling out will turn into people who are dying. So we really need to push that sort of narrative. And I think, the NHS is probably the best one you're going to get people on. But this housing one as well, we need to demystify this idea that, like, migrants are taking the houses. Like, you are not competing with a migrant. You are competing with somebody that can buy skyscrapers, not a house. Like, even with... make people realize the super rich is not somebody's, your mate's uncle who has a flat in Spain. It's a guy who can buy up skyscrapers. We really need to demystify this whole, the economy and what people see as inequality. Like, change the conversation from anti-immigrants to anti-wealth inequality,
housing is an interesting one, because it's not just fighting against Farage, it's fighting against the pretty much, I would say, zeitgeist of housing, which is that the problem is we're not building enough. And that's completely untrue, because in 2019, we had the highest amount of houses were built in 2019. And why did we have a housing crisis in 2019 when you hear sort of free marketeers, people from the IEA, they say all you need to do is build more housing? It's not the case. It's what houses you're building, because if we're just simply building lots and lots of housing, a lot of them which are basically just buy to let, then what happens is that housing stock just gets chewed up by the wealthiest society and then just get rented out. That's what's happening. What we need to do is build council houses. Once we demystify that, then I think we can probably then tackle this idea that migrants are taking up all the houses, because once again, when you say, migrants are taking up all the houses, that buys into the idea that actually we just don't have enough housing, and what we can do is just lower immigration and there's more houses available. But as I just said, in 2019, we literally had the record on house numbers, yet prices didn't fall. There was still a housing crisis. The number of housing, and I'm not saying I'm not against building more houses, we should, but that is not the reason why we have a housing crisis. It's the reason why it's because we've created a petty bourgeois society of landlords, and we've got companies like BlackRock, who Keir Starmer absolutely loves, and they're buying up all the housing stock for profit. We have foreign oligarchs who own housing stock that's empty. Right? They're leaving it there, so in 10, 20, 30, 40 years' time, the value appreciates and then they sell it off. No one talks about that. And that's what we need to do.
Bill Gates is like the biggest landowner in the world. And it's like, and everyone was like, making a conspiracy. Yeah, is he going to like build these like non-meat farms and all that? No, it is stock. It is stable stock. And when you are competing with people who are buying huge masses of land and houses just for the fact that it's stock, it accumulates value, it's passive income, then it completely loses its value as something we need as a roof over our heads that we need to survive. Like, there are certain things I just think should not be purely about profit. There needs to be caps on these things. And the housing thing, it baffles me that even in Rochdale, like, we have these council houses, like, it's called the Seven Sisters, like, it's big 7 blocks of flats, like, and right opposite they built like this brand new block of flats, like really nice. They are completely empty, they're completely dark at night, while the council flats aren't. They're full, and we have a 15-year waiting list for housing in Rochdale. And that is absolutely absurd. Like, this is what I mean about asking fundamental questions. Like, that is absurd. It just needs to be demystified and questioned, because honestly,
and that is a one example of how just simply having more housing stock doesn't house people because you've got empty flats there. I mean, I don't know where everyone else lives, but I'm sure everyone has seen student accommodation just literally fly up. I mean, in Leeds, I live in Leeds, right? And I mean, some of them are beautiful buildings, right? And like, I'm not a full-on YIMBY, but there's a slight spark of YIMBY in me. Where I'm like, oh, I love the fact that they're building housing, but I remind myself it's all student accommodation. And the problem is local residents are being priced out. They have to leave. There's mass gentrification. And to the free marketeers, to the IEA think tank goons, like, well, more housing stock. This is brilliant. There should be no housing crisis. Well, look, it's being reserved for students because people in Leeds, Manchester, Rochdale can't afford to live in them because even though the housing stock goes up, it doesn't necessarily mean that people can get a house, that people can have, renting, which is affordable. It's council housing, it's social housing, it's community housing that's owned by the community, not by the oligarchs. And I suppose we've gone off far away from this original point, but I suppose part of the strategy against Farage isn't just to demystify or attack his arguments or try and debunk them, because you're still sort of giving him the terrain, right? What you need to do is replace the narrative, which is what Zach Plansky is doing. Instead of sort of, and I think this is what liberals sort of fall into the trap of. When Nigel Farage says this or that, they spend their time saying, that's not true, here's the facts on this, here's the facts on that. All people hear is, this is Nigel Farage's argument, and that's it. Whereas the left, and again, Zach Plansky's doing it, instead of talking about Nigel Farage and his arguments, he's saying, no, this is our argument. The problem is billionaires. We need a wealth tax, and it's working. So it's almost like try not to engage in Nigel Farage's arguments because you're actually platforming them, platform our own arguments, and then get them to attack you on wealth taxes. And you're seeing that. As I used to putting an attack against Zach Polanski. Reform, I'm talking about the Greens, because they're not... the Greens will attack reform, but their main thing isn't to attack the right. Their main thing is to push their own narrative and get other people to attack their narrative. It's good when people attack the Greens, especially on wealth taxes, because then people hear is wealth taxes. Good or bad, we hear wealth taxes, and that's what we need to do. That, to me, that's my personal strategy. I'm not a political strategist, by the way, could be wrong, but that's in my head. That makes sense to me.
It probably, it probably does make sense to go down that route. I don't think they're ever gonna, the IEA are ever gonna understand social use value. I think that's probably barking up the wrong tree.
I mean, they don't even understand Adam Smith,
an interesting,
the godfather of modern capitalism. They don't understand him. He hates rentier capitalism. He hates landlords.
True. Do you guys have pets? Either of you?
No.
You don't have pets? So a renting thing and yeah. Okay. But do your parents maybe have pets?
I have parents, but they don't have. Oh wait, yeah, my mum does have a dog.
Curtis?
My mum often looks after my brother's dog.
Oh, your brother has a dog. Okay, that's family. Your brother is your family, even if you
last
don't
of my
want him to be
checks.
sometimes. So, have you ever spoken to them about vet bills?
I haven't, but I think I know where you're going with this.
How insane the vet bill crisis is, right? Honestly, I saw it the other day. This isn't an original thought of mine, but you have to frame the healthcare crisis and the potential for an insurance-based system through the conversation of, your pets who you love so much, that is the system that is screwing them over. You do not want that to be the system that screws your kids over, that screws you over, because it is exactly the same model as the Americans use. It's a private insurance model, and it sucks trying to get treatment for your pet. People across the UK have to take their beloved pets into vets while their children sob. And a lot of vets have serious mental health issues because of this, because they can't afford the treatment. So they literally have to have their beloved family pets put down while their children cry in the other room. Like, that is not a system that we want applied to people. And reaching people on that emotional level, I think, could be really, really useful. Sorry,
Ben, are you arguing for a national pet service? Because I tell you what, if the Green Party did that, 650 seats easy.
Yeah,
I'm being serious. Like, maybe we should start talking about a national pet service. We say, look, tell you what, everyone pays 2% more on taxes, and that means free healthcare for your pets, no bills. Honestly, Greens 650 seats, Reform 0 seats.
Yeah, I don't even like pets, but I'd be with
I'd
that.
vote for that.
Yeah, I mean, pets do make people happy though, and they can be quality of life changing for people like older people with dementia and things like that. It can make a real difference. Sorry, let's whiz through the comments because I'm aware that we have gone way over the normal allotted time for a show. I do apologise, but I'm just enjoying the chat so much. Azami said, these are the types of people I'm arguing with on TikTok. That's absolutely true. Bear in mind, a lot of the people you're arguing with on the internet are people who are in like bad situations themselves. There's, as much as that lady was being xenophobic, and we should absolutely recognize that, and that is a lot of the narrative that is going on in our country. The guy's turning around and saying, stuff about like PIP assessment and stuff. That is it is quite ableist, and there's a sort of like, we need to talk about the way that we treat benefit claimants as well. It's almost like we have a circuit of victims that we just circulate around. If we're not attacking immigrants or the disabled, sorry, if we're not attacking immigrants, we're attacking the disabled, or we're attacking pensioners, or attacking young people. Like there's always a group that the government and the media is targeting. Pensioners very rarely, because that did not go well for the Labour government.
I mean, I think that's why I really wanted to do this segment, because it really highlights that, like, genuine, real grievances. The disabled woman has a genuine grievance of her own personal situation. And those lads who are speaking in favour of immigration were really angry of seeing the xenophobia. And it puts you in a vicious cycle of fighting against one another. And the financial and political elite watch that just thinking, yes, we need more. We need this. We want this sort of continued forever and ever and ever. And it is such a state of play of our politics, and we need to sort of break that cycle.
Yeah.
Indeed. Good. Do you want to add anything, Louisa?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually funny. I don't think this person is watching, so it's fine. I can say it. But I had a similar situation. Like, there was a guy in front of me in the queue in Tesco the other day, and he wanted to buy 2 bottles of vodka, and he was £2.79 short, and he only had a tenner on him. And like, obviously, you could see this man was homeless or something. He was in like and everybody was just like, get out, mate. And I was like, there's your £3, you know what I mean? Enjoy your vodka. Like, why do we live in this environment where everybody just thinks everybody's against them? Like, and there was a girl that I was with, and she was like, I don't really understand, like, why you've done that. And I'm like, I don't understand why you wouldn't. You don't know. It's the story thing as well. Like, these people are not real to people. Like, the story that we're being told about poverty or migrants, it's a fantasy. It's a story. And if we don't change that and actually see them as human beings and stop dehumanizing them, then we're not going to get very far. We're not going to get that class consciousness, and we're not going to get that change in material conditions. And I think that's really important.
I do wonder if part of it is because of the glaring issues we face as a society. It's almost too hard to comprehend. So in order for us to feel powerless, it's easy to sort of target someone smaller. And easier.
Exactly.
No, I do feel like that might play a role there, because I do think that in the consciousness of people, everyone does understand that we do live in a world where you've got the elites and you've got people, like, people know that you've got billionaires who own yachts. People do fundamentally know that there is a political and financial elite who have more money than they need. It's not like that's a mystery to people. Everyone knows that. But I do think why some people fall into the trap of reactionary politics, because for some people, it's too big to deal with. It's too much of an uphill battle. So in order to feel less powerless, it's like, if I make my enemy an immigrant or a benefit scrounger, that gives me a sense of power, because I've got this real grievance and I'm putting it on someone else. It's too big to deal with when it's the 0.01%. In a way, it's too abstract. Even though it's very real, it's also very abstract because it's so big. Whereas actually attacking your neighbor next to you, it feels more real than anything. I mean, I don't know if you ever have conversations when yeah, you know, when someone says, "Oh, bloody people on benefits, all this and that, and bloody immigrant," and you say, "Hey, look, though, it's the elites, you know, it's the billionaires." Even though they know it's true, they also look at you as if you're sort of a conspiracy theorist. Because why are you talking about the elites when everyday life I'm rubbing shoulders with poor people and working class people? They're in my vicinity, so they're real. I've never met a billionaire, so even though I know you're right, it feels like it's not real. Therefore, my mind can only comprehend attacking someone who I'm rubbing shoulders with rather than this elite. I don't know if that sort of plays a role into it.
But also, like this, so the super rich aren't real, but the people on the small boats aren't real. Like that is completely constructed. Nobody, you don't know anybody who's met somebody who's come off a small boat. Like, you know, it's, and I think maybe we do need to change the conversation to actual conditions that will affect their lives. You know, do you want better housing? Do you want, you know, a decent welfare system? Like, do you want a good healthcare system? Like, these sort of things people should want and do want. You know, the far right don't realize they want socialism. They do. You know, and I think maybe that would be helpful if we took it away from these like imaginary people that people don't know. And you know, maybe it wouldn't play in so much to our social relations on an everyday level, and we think more about what people actually want. You know, this whole idea about like imagining a future, imagining a better future. I think it comes down to that.
Zoran Mamdani. And Zoran
Yeah, exactly.
So Becca, extraordinarily empathetic as ever, did see the side and was one of the people in the chat, not the only one, but one of the people in the chat who said, like, any help the disabled woman could access was out of her reach if she wasn't given the help, information, and support she needed to get it. And I can see why she's angry, because she's been set up. We all have been stitched up. It's really difficult, especially when somebody's spouting xenophobic rhetoric, to go, oh no, actually this is also a person who you have to apply the same logic to. Like, you can't apply a sort of like and I feel like the guys in the video were doing a bit of a like pull yourself up by your bootstraps type
They
mentality.
absolutely were.
And it's tempting to fall into that when somebody, you know, when somebody's who's in that position is but you got to be careful, because that's also just kicking down not that you shouldn't insult them for being stupid. Like, I think that's fine, but you've got to be careful about where your insults land. I think that's really important. The good globalist said, everyone knows there's a problem with the status quo. The left need to harness that dissatisfaction into an organized coalition. Absolutely. Specs Bean Farmer said the objectively correct statement, Louisa is based.
Of course.
Thanks, guys.
And no notes on that one.
Yes, what I'm going to do is okay. Oh, I should also highlight. Specs Bean Farmer said we VCing tonight, and that is a reference to we have a Discord, guys. If you're not in the Discord, check it out. Someone in the chat, I'm sure, can post a link if you wouldn't mind doing that. Join the Discord, and there's people who regularly join a voice chat afterwards. Good little social network if you want to get to know people better, get to know other lefties. We've got a good little Discord community going now.
There we go. We've got Jim Speak on the case.
Yes, and they run these guys all run it. We at the Turn Left team don't really we don't get involved in the running of it, and we appreciate the hell out of that, because that is absolutely superb. And
democratic Discord, you know, it's Turn Left adjacent, but we don't own it.
Yeah, it's superb. I love it. And I want to say it's Michael, but it could be Michaela. I've actually forgotten. Michael Askew. No, it's Michael Askew. I just remembered. It's Michael Askew. Said it's too late for this iteration of Labour. People have probably made up their minds regardless of anything they do now. I think this is true. I'm going to get your guys' opinions in a minute, but I think this is true. But I also think that the like they can still positively contribute, even though people won't trust them anymore. They can still change the narrative and what people are talking about and have a positive impact. But I personally will never trust them again because of the way that they have lied and been so dishonest. And let's be honest, it's just funny to mock Rachel Reeves for the berries and cream haircut as well. But yeah, what do you guys think on that, about trusting Labour in people having already given up on this iteration of Labour?
Yeah, I agree. I think people have given up. I think what we need to be concerned about, obviously people will, I'm going to vote green, a lot of our friends will vote green. Like, what we need to be aware of are these people in the middle that now are going to either vote green or reform. If truly, or Lib Dem potentially, that's probably the only other option. But if, centrist politics is dead, then we have a lot of work to do, because Reform are winning in the polls in terms of that. And, the Greens are doing so well. Like, I have a lot of hope that, they will. But we really need to change the narrative, and we don't have a lot of time. Like, we really, really need to be careful of these people in the middle. And I think, speaking to the far right, that's obviously people, it's very, very difficult to change people's minds who are so angry. But speaking to people that are on the fence, what's going to change where we go in the next 4 years here?
Yeah, I think electorally, the Labour Party are finished. The only sort of Hail Mary they got is Andy Burnham, although that's based on one poll, which shows they have 30% of the vote and would put them ahead of Reform. Andy Burnham is obviously definitely more popular than Keir Starmer, because anyone is more popular than Keir Starmer. Quite literally, this Labour government now polls lower than Andrew Mountbatten, formerly known as Prince Andrew. Not good, is it? So a Hail Mary could be, Andy Burnham somehow gets there, maybe can win an election on a very small majority. But I think Ben is absolutely right. It's not really about whether they can win the next election, because they probably won't. It is important that they start moving the Overton window, because that is what politics is. So I would love for the Labour Party to actually bring in the wealth tax. I would love the Labour Party to move left, even on rhetoric, so we can just change the conversation. Even though I don't trust them as far as I can throw them. Even if they said, oh, do you know what, next election, we're going to have a wealth tax, we're going to abolish billionaires, they won't do it. But I want them to say this, because we need to move the dial back to the left. Anytime they say, actually, Reform are right on immigration, we're just going to do it, just not quite as bad, they're moving the dial to the right.
Yeah, and I don't know if anybody saw, I interviewed Andy Burnham the other week.
I did see that, yeah, that was really cool.
It was very unexpected. But I asked him about wealth taxes. I mean, he can say what he wants, because he's not an MP, but he was on board with wealth taxes. So, that gives me hope. He is really well liked in the north, because he has done a lot for us. He got the buses back into public ownership, like the transport and stuff. And I think that's always like a very good telling point as well of how, they would sort of do, is how they do for their own constituency. But like I said, it's very unlikely. I know somebody said, I can't remember which MP said, they'd give up the seat to allow Andy Burnham to...
Lewis, yeah.
Yeah.
Roll back on that, though.
Oh, right, okay, never mind then.
Polls show they're going to lose in Leicester, so I think if Andy Burnham does have to run as MP, he needs to do it in Manchester anyway. But there's no such thing as a safe seat for the Labour Party. But maybe
I don't think
a strong campaign for him could work.
I mean, we're in very tumultuous times, aren't we? Anything could really happen. But yeah, I do think that what we can do as, the left is, like you were saying, like change the Overton, or do our best to change the conversation and the dialogue and get people on board who maybe are in the middle, and, really be able to like validate their feelings and tell them what the truth is in terms of like policies and stuff.
Yeah, I have one final comment, just to flash up on screen. I won't ask you about it. Starmer's media strategy has always been keep quiet, let my record speak for itself. But if you say nothing, your opponents will tell the story for you. And I think that is one message that we do want people to take away today.
Doesn't have much of a record himself anyway, but
A while back, Curtis and I had a conversation about needing to keep the shows to an hour. We have really not done well on that front today, but it's been an interesting conversation, and I'm glad that we have. But it's almost 2 hours at this point, so I am going to hand back. I can't believe
nearly 2 hours. Yeah,
yeah. I'm going to hand back to Curtis.
Thank you so much, Ben. Yes, as you heard there, it's nearly 2 hours. Again, we're aiming for 1 hour shows, hour and a quarter, but we've done nearly 2 hours. It's because, and I have to say, it's because we have the fantastic Louisa Munch on. Fantastic analysis, especially my favourite portion, talking about Marx's analysis. Thank you so much for coming on again.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed it. I feel like there's always so much to talk about, and like I said, we could probably talk for another hour, but I've got students to teach in the morning, unfortunately.
When you got turn left in the evening and students to teach in the morning, as
Yeah.
life goes. But of course, that is all we have time for. Thank you to our viewers who tuned in, and of course, thank you to again Louisa for joining tonight. Also, thank you to the viewers who are very generous tonight with the super chats and the membership. Remember to like the stream, and if you're not a subscriber, then please hit that button. If you want us to grow, then you can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There is a link to our Patreon where you can support us monthly, or you can follow the other link to give us a one-time contribution. Alternatively, you can become a YouTube member for just 99p. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.